What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today I am just going to go over my basic Lightning Storm build here for Season 3, and it is a pretty good build that I've used throughout Season 1 and Season 2. I've probably leveled up about a dozen hardcore druids with this build alone, so I know it actually works. Now, that being said, I have left some skill points on the table just in case you guys are starting out brand new to Diablo 4, so you won't automatically have those 10 skill points. But for those veteran players, if you're coming across this video, go ahead and allocate those 10 skill points however you would like. And I've also went ahead and added the very first Paragon board to this build once you hit level 50. Also, I will be adding some leveling tips at the end of this video, but I'm really going to try to run through this pretty quickly as I don't really think it needs to be that complex. I know a lot of people have spreadsheets and all this crazy stuff, but honestly, there hasn't been many changes with Druid into Season 3, and I'm not really going to go into the pet companion because I don't have my hands on that specific content yet to actually test it out. So until that happens, I'm not going to put that in the build, but I will go ahead and update this build once I get the chance to actually test out the pet companion. Now, with that being said, before we get started, I want to mention a specific bug with channeling skills. And I think this doesn't get mentioned a lot because a lot of people actually don't make channeling builds. And I've used this basic Lightning Storm build, like I said, to level up probably a dozen hardcore druids throughout Season 1 and Season 2. And I know for a fact this bug still exists, even though they've said they've patched it previously. So basically what this bug is while you're channeling a skill, whether it be Lightning Storm or Whirlwind or whatever channeling skills exist out there that I haven't played, if you get knocked back or stunned or some version of a CC while you're channeling that skill, it will actually lock your character out of moving, and you'll also be locked out of casting your core skill, your channeling skill. And it basically just leaves your character there at a huge disadvantage, and that is a big reason why I have not made a complete Lightning Storm build in the past, especially because I've only ever played hardcore. And if you play hardcore, you know for a fact, especially in the early game, if you get locked in place and you can't cast your skills, it pretty much spells death for your character. So just be aware of that specific bug with channeling skills when you're using this Lightning Storm build if you so choose to. That way you can know what to do when that does happen, or that you know it's not something that you're specifically doing with your character that's causing that to happen. But now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the build. So for the assigned skills, we are just going to be using Wind Shear, Lightning Storm, obviously. Then we have Earthen Bulwark for our Unstoppable, and we are going to use our Earthen Bulwark only when we're actually stunned up, crowd controlled. Then we'll use our Earthen Bulwark. Don't just spam it because we have no way to cool it down consistently until we get into the mid game. Then we're also going to be running all three companion skills, because this will be a Shepherd's Aspect build, like pretty much every build is going to be this season, because, like I said, they really haven't changed much with the Druid overall. Then for the Spirit Boons, we are Spirit Bonded into the Deer, and there's a reason why I like to do this, because, again, like I said, I usually play this on Hardcore, even though this season I am going to change it up and play on Softcore until the leaderboards come out. And I go ahead and I pick up Weariness for the damage reduction towards elites, and then I also pick up Advantageous Beast to further reduce my control impairing effects, and that will just help kind of alleviate some of that pain from getting stunned up all the time, especially if we don't have our Bulwark on cooldown. Then we're going into the Eagle, and I like to choose swooping attacks first because I get a lot more out of that increased attack speed. But in the later game, I will always switch to Scythe Talons for the increased critical strike chance. And then obviously you have to go with Avian Wrath this season, because now instead of it being 30% additive critical strike damage, it is 30% multiplicative. So, but until I get to the late game or mid game, I always like to stick it out with swooping attacks just because I like that extra attack speed. Then for the Wolf, we're going to be running Energized, and honestly, I'm so surprised that this did not get a buff. However, even though I don't stick with this into the late game, I like to run it early on just for that added chance to restore some spirit. Then for our very last boon on the Snake, we're running Overload just for that opportunity to generate a little bit more damage. Not for the equipment here, and really I just go for the aspects, because honestly I just swap out equipment until I get to tier 3, and then I'll actually start caring about stats. And the only real stats I care about are movement speed, because I like to move fast. So if you can get a nice pair of boots with movement speed and a nice amulet with movement speed, go ahead and keep those equipped. But other than that, I don't really care. I'm just looking for more armor and possibly more stats. Other than that, it's not a big deal. So the aspects you're going to be looking for is the aspect of Disobedience, and this is an easy one to get because you can unlock it from a dungeon. dungeon if you haven't already unlocked it. And it basically just gives you a lot of armor. So this is a really great aspect for survivability from the early game into the late game. Then I go for the aspect of might, another easy aspect to get that you can unlock from the dungeons, and this just gives you more damage reduction, and we are going to be weaving our basic attacks with our lightning storm to generate resources, so we'll always have this 20% damage reduction. Then on the gloves, I like to run retaliation. It is getting a bit of a nerf this season. I'm not really sure why, but it's still really good. 20 to 30% multiplicative damage, and all you have to do is have some fortify, which is really easy to build up on the Druid. Then for the pants, I like aspect of Mending Stone, and I just like it because it increases the duration of our bulwark, and because we don't have a reliable way early on to cool down our bulwark, it makes it a lot easier to utilize our bulwark in a significant situation and then have that barrier up with Unstoppable for at least a few more seconds to get us out of danger. Then for the boots, the aspect of Slaughter. Now, this is something I used last season. It was the new aspect from last season. So if you do get this, definitely equip it. It really helps with quality of life in the early game for the Druid because, you know, we're always kind of slogging around. We're really slow. So that 20% movement speed is really nice. So if you can manage to get your hands on this aspect, go ahead and equip it on a pair of boots. It's really nice in the early game. And then we will swap that out later on. But for the early game, it's really good. Then for our weapon, we're going to run the Shepherd's aspect, and you'll pretty much see this across the board with plenty of Lightning Storm builds, and that's just because this is the best way to build up multiplicative damage towards your core skill, and that is, again, why we're running all three companions. Not because they're good, because they're actually pretty trash, except for Poison Creeper, maybe, but it's really just so we get that multiplicative damage bonus. And also, you could run a staff with this to get that two-handed bonus to double up this Shepherd's aspect bonus if you'd like to. Then for the amulet, we're running the rapid aspect. Now, you could obviously swap out Shepherds with rapid, but I like the rapid aspect on the amulet because I do like the attack speed early on, especially for building up our spirit because you know how difficult it can be in the early game for druids when it comes to spirit generation. Then for our ring, we're going to run the aspect of Stampede just to get that one extra companion to play off of the Shepherd aspect. And you will notice that these aspects exist in pretty much every build into the late game, including Lightning Storm late game builds. So do expect to see a lot of people running the aspect of Stampede and the Shepherd's aspect. It's something I've been running since Season 1, but in Season 1, there were other aspects that were far superior to these, especially the Rampaging Werebeast aspect, which had an infinitely stacking critical strike damage multiplier. So once they nerfed that, people ended up swapping to the Shepherd's aspect with the Stampede aspect just because you get that multiplicative damage bonus from your companions towards your core skills. And then for the very last aspect, it is the Lightning Dancers aspect. Now, do not expect to get this aspect all the time because you do level fairly fast into Tier 3 and Tier 4, and sometimes you get quite unlucky with your aspect drops on your specific legendary. So when you do get it, definitely equip it. It is a phenomenal aspect. It really helps generate a lot of AoE damage for your Druid, and that is something we're really lacking on the Druid in the early game. So if you manage to come across a Lightning Dancers aspect early on, you will find your leveling process that much easier into the mid and late game. Now for the very last aspect, and like I said, this is completely optional. You can absolutely choose to run a two-handed staff and just run the Shepherd's aspect, but if you choose to run a totem, the aspect of the elements is a pretty nice way to get some multiplicative damage every now and again when it switches to your lightning damage type. So this is something to keep in mind, pretty decent aspect. Like I said, this is a flex spot and you can definitely use a different aspect here, or you can just run a staff and go ahead and get that big bonus from the Shepherd's aspect. Now for the gems, I like to do the emeralds on the weapon. For the armor, I like to do topaz in the early game, and this is just a way to increase our damage reduction while we're under control and pairing effects, and you'll find yourself in that situation quite a lot in the early game, especially with the Druid. I know we have the Earthen Bulwark to give us Unstoppable, but it's not always on cooldown when you need it, and this is a great way to add some survivability early on. And then for the jewelry, we're obviously going to run diamonds just because that all resist is very beneficial, especially in the early game before we have all of our Paragon points assigned. Now on to the skill tree, and I do have it set for every single level for you guys. If you need something like that, it's set exactly like that, so that way you guys have a reference for how I specifically like to level out this build. But some players don't really need that, and honestly, it's perfectly fine. If you go with a build similar to this, you'll do just fine, but this is just my preference. And like I said, I left 10 points off of the board just in case you guys choose to do whatever you'd like with those 10 points, or if you're a brand new player and you don't have your renown done for your character. So let's just get right into it. So we're using Wind Shear, and then we're moving into Wild Wind Shear, so we generate more spirit off of our Wind Shear hits. Then we're going down and we're going straight into Lightning Storm, and then we're following that up into Raging Lightning Storm just to get that additional lightning strike that we need just to hit more enemies on the screen. And then for the passives, you definitely want to go 1 point into Heart of the Wild, and that's really so you can get Wild Impulses. And this is a really great passive, and you'll see this in pretty much every core skill build because it only adds a little bit more spirit cost, but gives you a massive 15% multiplicative damage bonus to your core skills. You really can't go wrong with this. And then, like I said, I left 10 points off, so you can obviously pick up Predatory Instinct if that's something you think you'd like to have for your build. Then moving down to our defensive skills, we got Earthen Bulwark, and then we're moving into Preserving Earthen Bulwark just to generate a little Fortify, and that plays into the retaliation aspect. This is a nice way to generate some Fortify for our character. Then we're going 3 points Ancestral Fortitude for that additive 15% resistance to all elements. Then, like I said, for our companion skills, we're grabbing 1 point into each one, and then we're going into Ferocious Wolves just to add some more chance to build up Fortify for our Druid. We're also going into the Brutal Poison Creeper to get that added critical strike chance towards enemies that are under the effect of our active skill use of Poison Creeper. And then we're going into Brutal Ravens just to get that 2 additional Ravens, so that way we boost up our Shepherd's aspect that much more. Down into our Wrath skill tree, you'll see we're not picking up any of the skills here, but we are going into the Lightning passive tree. We're going 1 point Elemental Exposure, 1 point Charged Atmosphere, and that's really so we can get 3 points Electric Shock, which gives us a high chance to create Immobilize on enemies, and then we also get a massive multiplicative damage bonus with our lightning damage towards those enemies under Immobilize. And then we're going 3 points into Bad Omen, and this is just another passive just like Overcharged on our Boon Tree, just to give us an opportunity to generate a little bit more damage off of lucky hits. Then for our ultimate skill, you'll see I haven't selected any ultimate skill because our bar will be completely filled up with all of our different skills, so we don't have room for one just yet. But I will go 3 points in Defiance because this gives us a big multiplicative damage bonus towards Elite with our Nature Magic skills. And then I go 3 points into Circle of Life. I like Circle of Life in the early game because it gives us a little bit more survivability here. And, you know, there are not many ways for Druid to generate HP in the early game, and this is a nice way to do that because we are going to be using Lightning Storm, so we're going to get plenty of life back with this passive. And then for our last passes on the ultimate tree, we're going 1 point Defensive Posture, 1 point Nature's Resolve, and then we're going 2 points Unrestrained. And like I said, there are 10 points left. You can definitely max this out early on. And I really love this passive, especially in the early game, because reducing the control impairing effects on your character is a lifesaver. I can't tell you how many times I've been saved by this passive as well as the Advantageous Beast passive on our boon board, just because of how many CCs there are in the game, and just reducing the duration of those CCs, man, it really saves me a ton, especially when you have that in combination with the Topaz on the armor. So definitely give this passive a try if you haven't, and it is seeing a little bit of a buff in Season 3, so I would definitely check it out if I were you, especially in the early game. And then for our key passive, we're using Perfect Storm. Now, this is only for the early game. Perfect Storm is pretty much tied with Bestial Rampage as probably 2 of the very worst key passives in the game. However, in the early game for Druid, it's pretty nice because you get a little bit of Spirit Regeneration and you get a nice sizable chunk of multiplicative damage for your Storm skills. So definitely go Perfect Storm early on, but I will typically switch into Nature's Fury, especially if I get the symbiotic aspect in the early game, because I love Nature's Fury, and the symbiotic aspect combination just allows me to cool down my Earthen Bulwark really fast, and I can always maintain Unstoppable, especially if I need it in a pinch. Now for our Paragon board, and this is just a basic first Paragon board for when you hit level 50. And you see here, we're just kind of trailing up. We're grabbing a rare node here. We're going up into our very first glyph, and if you get lucky enough to get it, Electrocution would probably be the best one for your very first glyph. It gives a pretty decent size multiplicative damage bonus for enemies that are hit by your Lightning Dancer's aspect or any of your additional lightning bolts, so that is why I love this glyph so much, and it also scales pretty well. So definitely pick this one up if you get lucky, and then obviously we're just going to trail off into some rare nodes here to get a little more damage, and then a little bit more resistance, and then we're just going up and stopping there. Now, I will be making a complete Lightning Storm in-game build for you guys in the future, but do be on the lookout for some pretty crazy builds because I've been theory crafting a lot, and I think I can make a couple surprising builds for you guys that not many people are talking about right now. And I'm more interested in those builds than a Lightning Storm build at first, but I will go ahead and make a complete in-game Lightning Storm build in the future. But that's it for the build, guys. Now we're going to go into some tips for leveling. However, I will put a link to this build in the description of this video, and I will go ahead and link this video into the build on Mobalytics so that way you guys can look at it for yourselves. So for leveling tips, just be aware that this could be completely outclassed when the new content comes because no one knows how good that content is going to be for XP grinding. But as it stands, I'm just going to talk about the most efficient way to level that we currently know of in the early game. And that's going to be Domhani tunnels. Now, I don't know if that's the proper pronunciation for that specific word. However, I've heard people say it in many different ways, and most people just call it dopamine tunnels because of the mob density at the very beginning of the dungeon, which is the only part of the dungeon that you're going to complete. So the easiest way to get there is to travel over to the core batch waypoint, and this is going to be in Scotsglen. And then you're just going to set yourself up a marker on the dopamine tunnels and then obviously just run there with your horse. And like I said, you're just going to complete the very first section of that dungeon, killing all the mobs in a big circle basically. Then you're going to teleport out, reset the dungeon, and then repeat that process over and over again. Now, like I said, this is the most efficient way that we currently know of to level your character in the early game. After you hit your first capstone dungeon and go into tier 3, you're going to do nightmare dungeons from there. But this is not the most fun way to do it, at least not the most fun way for most players. So do whatever is fun for you because honestly, getting to level 100 is pretty easy now that they've made all the XP buffs from Season 2. But if you're a person like me who really wants to do it the most efficient way, that is currently the best way we know how to do it in the early game. And I definitely want to get my character to level 100 as fast as possible, so that way I can get some really cool builds made for you guys to test out. But that is all for the video, guys. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. And if you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to ask because I am always communicating in my comments. I love to answer questions. I love to have feedback from you guys. And it's really something I enjoy the most when I'm making content for Diablo 4. But as always, I hope you guys are having a great day or a great night, depending on wherever you're from. And I really look forward to playing with you guys in Season 3. But for now, peace out, guys. I will see you, well, I'll see you tomorrow.